I'm Ethan Schlegg.
I'm Tim Rouge.
And today we are going to be analyzing a critical person in our history, and he brings a lot of ethical dilemmas for us to look at, and that man is Martin Luther King Jr. Now, the thing that we have to look at as Christians is that Romans 13:1 through 2 says this. It says, "Let every soul be subject to the governing authorities. For there is no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are appointed by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authority resists the ordinance of God, and those who resist will bring judgment on themselves." But one of the most praised people that resisted the government was Martin Luther King Jr. Well, how do we balance rebelling in a right way, but Romans 13 says that we shouldn't resist the authorities? How do we balance that? So in order to understand what Martin Luther King Jr. was standing for, we have to have a little bit of historical context, what's going on. So, it's the end of the Civil War, okay? Abraham Lincoln just gave his Emancipation Proclamation speech. Very powerful. 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments get passed, which basically say that all men, including all colors, have this right to vote. However, Louisiana kind of twists that. In 1896, in the case of Plessy versus Ferguson, they are arguing that Plessy, who is 7/8 European, he's still a black man. And they actually already started this process of segregation where certain men on the railroad, the black men had to go on a different area. They had to work in a different area. And they brought this case all the way to the Supreme Court because Plessy's lawyers were like, hey, this goes against the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. Yet, however, the Supreme Court voted that it is possible to be separate but equal. Not quite sure what that actually means, but a direct result from that was segregation, which happened from early 1900s, late 1800s, all the way to the Civil Rights Movement. And that was passed in 1964.
One of the questions we kind of want to dive in quick here is, how does the environment that King grew up in and whole background of being a minister and coming from a ministry family affect how he makes decisions at the movement, like at this movement, what's going on with segregation? Like, how does that really affect him? Mm-hmm. And how people view the movement and how they accept the movement. Are they less acceptable of it? Are they more acceptable of it? So let's talk a little bit more about that.
I think one thing that Martin Luther King Jr. does is that he brings balance to the table. So what I mean by that is he was born in Atlanta, Georgia, okay? So we're not talking Louisiana, Alabama, deep south, but we're still talking about a state that's pretty segregated, that's had a pretty rich history of this divide between black and white. But he's also the son and grandson, all right?
And great-grandson.
Great-grandson, yeah, of a Baptist minister, which we know that Baptists are heavily dominated in that area, down in the South. So he brought those both approaches. I feel like people respected him because he came with, hey, I have this idea of equality, but I don't want to have a gun in your face. Mm-hmm. All right, I believe in this passionately, but I've been taught my whole life that love and peace is the best way to fight injustice. And how do you fight against that as a person? How do you combat that?
In the letter from Birmingham jail,
Mm-hmm.
he actually kind of talks about the 4 steps of how you fight that in a nonviolent protest. So there's actually a quote out of it. In any nonviolent campaign, there are 4 basic steps: collection of the facts to determine whether injustices are alive, negotiation, self-purification, and direct action. Mm-hmm. So this is what MLK says about it. You have to first be able to determine whether the injustices are alive. Are they real? Are they there? And then after that, attempt to negotiate, kind of talk about that, and that's something that they already did, but nothing's happening. Self-purification, which is what they did, what are we doing this for? Are you able to stand your ground even when people are yelling in your face, spitting on you when you're sitting in that restaurant or you're sitting on the bus? Are you able to withstand that and keep yourself strong and direct action? So after all those other steps, all right, we got to do something. We got to sit on the bus. We have to do that.
Yeah.
That's the steps. So in nonviolent, this is the basic makeup of how you do it. This is how he thinks and sees the world and how you can better respond to situations.
I think I want to back up a little bit to talk about something here. I have a quote from him, and it says, "My parents would always tell me that I should not hate the white man, but that it was my duty as a Christian to love them. The question arose in my mind, how could I love a race of people who hated me and who had also been responsible for breaking me up with one of my best childhood friends? This was a great question in my mind for a number of years." So I think even before he was starting to act out, he was struggling with this ever since he was a child. Growing up with having relatives, your dad, your grandpa, they're all ministers. He was battling this for quite some time. With this, I think the reason why he fought so hardly for segregation or to end segregation was because of his biblical beliefs. He blatantly paralleled segregation with sin, and so in its biblical essence, sin separates us from God, as we know, and then the purpose of segregation creates outcasts from society. So he saw both of these injustices and kind of wanted to overcome that. But I think the best way for him to do that was just to think about, how can I love on these people while still respecting them?
In this letter from Birmingham jail, we talked about this in American Research too. He balanced ethos, logos, and pathos. And if you can balance those three, people will follow you. It's an automatic. So ethos is who I am. Why should I even follow you in the first place? And he lays it out to where I've experienced segregation. I've been in the midst of it. And I've seen that love and patience, but you have to act. That's what works. And pathos, I mean, even as I have a dream speech, you can see it. He's passionate about this. You know, if he was just monotone about it the whole time, no one would follow him. And then logos, in his letter, he just lays out practical ways of why segregation is a sin, and that this is wrong, and that it just doesn't make sense. If you have those three, that's why people follow him.
I think it's noteworthy to point out to how he just immersed himself in all that and all the people that hated him, and he never broke. You know, he always was able to push through it somehow.
I think we should go back and kind of focus on this letter of Birmingham jail. Like, a lot of great things, kind of how his makeup of who the character of MLK was, which was in this letter. Here, if you look right here, he says, "I cannot sit idly by in Atlanta and not be concerned about what happens in Birmingham. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." Did you catch that? Right there. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So, MLK, this is a big thing. Shows exactly his whole mission right here. He's saying that injustice right here, if we let it grow, it will completely keep growing and won't stop. And just because, hey, there's some people down south, we don't mind, that doesn't matter. I mean, we're doing great up here. Oh, we're fine. No, that means everywhere right there, what's happening right there could keep growing and go back. Segregation could go across the whole country.
If it's not totally different.
If it's not stopped.
Probably answers the question why the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment really did. It did work, but it didn't really have the effect that it should have, because there was still injustice going on. Just because you pass a law doesn't mean that injustice has to go away.
Well, it's also hard to change the thoughts of everybody, of every individual, because I think that's what ethics, kind of stems from. It's like, well, I have this morality, so it's going to be hard with just one law. You can't change, the mind of an entire nation of people, and also with the Civil War, it didn't really resolve in in a definite thing where everybody agreed to it. Both sides of the people fighting in the war were still thinking, different opinions and stuff. So just setting out a law didn't do much good, and there was still that injustice.
Okay, so kind of moving on from the letter from Birmingham to Martin Luther King Jr. wrote. We have to realize that Jesus, he dealt with zealots, all right? He dealt with Simon the Zealot, but he never approved what they were doing, all right? Yet you could almost say that Jesus did resist the Romans, just not so much outwardly, but almost just with his character. And that's what we're kind of going out. We believe Martin Luther King Jr. didn't go against Romans 13 because he wasn't saying that we need to tear down this government, it's the worst. He's saying, no, this is what I believe in, and I think that this government should incorporate this.
Yeah, like I said, I think all of this comes down to him trying to figure out how to love the people who are hating him. And in the letter of Birmingham that he wrote when he was in jail there, he says something like, any group of people or individuals who suffer from oppression based on their identity can fall prey to a deep despair. We have a moral obligation to help people who are oppressed. So he was seeing all these people who are oppressed because of segregation, and he wanted to help them, and that's why he did all these great things within the civil rights movement. But I want to kind of back up to that, talking about how we have a moral obligation to help people who are oppressed. Do we still have that moral obligation today? Is that something as Christians right now in America that is in kind of the back of our mind? Because I know for me, like, there's been a lot of stuff that, even since I came to North Central, I had an experience where previously, before I came here, I never really would have thought about news around the world, refugees that need places to live here. But my views have definitely changed from coming here. And do we still have that moral obligation to help them, and why aren't we doing more?
Well, I think us as Christians, we're called to help. If you go look at Matthew, it's always speaking about the church going and helping the poor, like bless the poor. You know, the Lord speaks a lot about blessing you being blessed for helping the poor. So I think we still have an obligation. We have all these refugees coming in and all around, and it's not just segregation now. Like I said, the refugees coming in. We have an obligation to help those and to minister to those, because every soul that is standing there and you're not ministering to is dying. It's dying. It's going to hell. So every person we're obligated to help as Christians, because these people, we're supposed to seek the lost, because people are dying. They're going to hell. So without us, they're nothing. They got nothing. They got nowhere else to go. So instead of looking at it as a burden are all these refugees coming in, it's an opportunity. And
that mandate stays there no matter what, even if the government says, all right, we're going to shut it off. All right, we're going to allow no more refugees coming in. That doesn't stop our mandate. And that didn't stop Martin Luther King Jr. Just because segregation existed, just because the authorities allowed it, that doesn't mean that it was okay.
Right.
So, coming back to Romans 13, this ethical dilemma, what we're saying is, if the United States government stopped, okay, we cannot help refugees anymore. It's the law. The worst thing we can do is try to burn down the White House. That's the worst thing we're going to do, which we're going to actually talk about a little bit later. Malcolm X, that was kind of his thing. And I think Malcolm X went directly against Romans 13. But Martin Luther, he says, no, I'm still going to help. And, no, I'm still going to stand for this. And that's what Christians are called to do. It's pretty powerful.
Yeah. Yeah, the next thing I had here was because he saw this moral obligation to help those people who were oppressed. A lot of people, he had said that opposed to waiting, he just called it direct action. And he says, we know through painful experience that freedom is never voluntary given by the oppressor. Yeah. It must be demanded by the oppressed. He was really influenced by Gandhi and his civil disobedience, that campaign that ended in British rule in India. He visited India, I think, a couple of times in his life, and that I believe that if he hadn't gone to that trip and seen how Gandhi had solved some of the issues that India was having at their time when he was their leader, I think it would have turned out completely different, his whole movement within segregation. He possibly could have turned out to be more like Malcolm X. Right, because with Gandhi being just this really peaceful person and streaming for nonviolence, if that wasn't the case and he didn't take up that campaign, then I think it would have ended in a lot different. Right?
What do you think, Josh? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, Gandhi is such an interesting character. He was actually born in South Africa, not India, which is something to note, which is also very heavily segregated, South Africa. So he saw that, and then he moved to India, and he saw the oppression from the British, all right? And he called out a boycott of all British goods. So much that you see often Gandhi's, that he was starving himself. That's why we see so many pictures of him, just ribs and all. There's actually a time where he went down to the Indian Ocean and he started harvesting his own salt with groups of people because he didn't want to buy British salt anymore. He was standing up for that. And he was willing to do so much, but yet he still wasn't firing. I don't think he ever shot a bullet at anybody. And I don't think Martin Luther ever shot a bullet at anybody. But he was willing, he stood up for this, for justice, for equality so much. And I think Martin Luther, he saw that. They saw that. And once again, we're going to get to Malcolm X, but Malcolm X saw a lot of hardships, but it's what you choose to do with the hardships that are presented to you. That's what's going to affect your ethics.
And Gandhi, you talk about that, Gandhi, he was able, like that Salt March, that was like 8,000 people. So you saw that this peaceful movement was able to bring up not just a few people, but a great amount of people. And MLK was able to capitalize on that and take that idea and use that on almost a much greater level in America.
What is his march to Washington?
Yeah, that was
his
march.
huge.
Like that's huge. He was able to use that and recognize that sometimes peace is the best way to go.
Yeah.
But peace in a way that it's not afraid to come up with conflict, but it's nonviolent conflict.
And if I was a citizen, and if I saw the Black Panthers rolling down tanks, it'd be a little more intimidating to join that than a march to Washington. That's something that in me would want to follow.
Well, if you think about it, like when you get in a fight with someone and someone keeps coming at you over and over again, throwing insults at you, hey, you're this, you're that, you're crap, doing all that, you're not likely to listen to them.
Right.
You don't want to listen to someone who's always trying to attack you. And it's the same way in America. All right, you're coming up to all these racist white people and the government. If you're trying to come out guns blazing, what are the odds that they're going to actually listen?
It gives them an excuse to use the police, and the media will just say, oh, look, they fought against the authorities. But what are you going to say about against love?
Yeah.
What are you going to do?
It's really amazing how far he went to keep his whole movement nonviolent at all. There was actually something I came across in my research that I was totally shocked by. I had never heard of it before in my life. In 1958, when he wrote his first book, Stride Toward Freedom, he was at a book signing and he was stabbed by a black woman. Almost dying, he viewed this experience as sort of a case study, and then here's a famous quote from him. It says, "I became convinced that if the movement held to the spirit of nonviolence, our struggle and example would challenge and help redeem not only America, but the world." So just the fact that like the guy got stabbed at a book signing where he was trying to help this whole civil rights movement by a black woman nonetheless. Not even, and so I don't know the whole like story behind that, but the fact that he got stabbed and was able to come out stronger because of it, and almost just not saying not even America, but he really wanted to change the world. It just kind of, to me, it's like it's really sad that he didn't live longer, that he was shot, because if he did, what greater things could he have really done? You know.
This is what he said to the press. Can't remember the specific dates, but he said the method of nonviolent resistance is one of the most potent, if not the most potent, weapons available to oppress people in their struggle for freedom. Nonviolent resistance, and that's what we've kind of been hammering at. And it's wild that he was even stabbed by a black woman.
Yeah.
And it makes me wonder if that lady was part of maybe the black movement or something that was fought for aggression, but he still stood for it. So, how far is too far, ethically? We believe that there is a line, and that, bringing it back to our thesis, Romans 13, there is a point where resisting authorities, you are resisting against God. And we believe that line is where Malcolm X kind of comes in, because he chose a totally different route. And if you hear a little bit about his history, you can't really blame him, but I don't think it gives us the right to resist in his way against authority. He was actually a son of a Baptist preacher. All right, so he still had that background too. But due to the Ku Klux Klan, his family had moved from Omaha, Nebraska to Lansing, Michigan. However, a group of people that we really don't talk about is called the Black Legionaries, which was kind of an offset of the Ku Klux Klan. And they would dress up, the Ku Klux Klan was dressed up all in white. They would dress up in all black, have a Bible in their hand. Kind of the same thing, pitchfork. But what happened is his father was killed. His head was crushed. His head was almost amputated from his body. But however, and there was pretty good evidence that it was from this group. However, the authorities at the time, the police, I believe, said that it was just a suicide. It was a suicide attempt, and they didn't receive any of the death benefits he didn't receive any death benefits from his father. So, he's a young man and he sees this, all right? So what he does is he finds this Nation of Islam, and he kind of gets inspired this by Elijah Muhammad, who really called for violence in a nutshell. And he wanted to reject the white America and the Christian views with violence. This is one of his speeches. It was called The Ballot or the Bullet. This is Malcolm X. The ballot or the bullet. This is just a section. It says, it's got to be the ballot or the bullet. The ballot or the bullet. If you're afraid to use an expression like that, you should go back to the cotton patch. You should get back in the alley. So he says, African Americans, if you're not willing to fight for this, go back to the patch, because that's where you're going to be. That's all that's going to happen out of this. Get back. So, this combination of Islam and black nationalism kind of led to almost the black movement. After his death in 1965, it kind of caused this black movement, also known as the Black Panthers. However, interesting is in June 1964, he founded this Afro-American Unity, and it was kind of pushing towards socialism. So he kind of changed a little bit because he had a pilgrimage to Mecca. All right, and there they talked about that there is unity of the races. And so he kind of changed in a little bit. But it was almost too late because he got assassinated on February 21st, 1965. But we're mainly going to focus on why we believe Malcolm X kind of went too far in his earlier years.
Well, I think we approach this issue and the whole situation. He had this whole background. If we look at this background, KKK, like you talked about, you can kind of see how this would drive a man to go and do such actions. But I think it's also interesting to look at his background. Someone who had a father who's also a Baptist pastor, preacher, reverend, whatever else you want to call that, still was able to go on a exact, almost opposite mindset of MLK. They both had the same goals. They both wanted segregation ended. Like, they didn't want to see KKK running around killing people. Like, they both wanted the same thing, but they had completely different viewpoints in how to get there. And I think it's just interesting how just one thing that happened in a person's life can completely change how they approach the world and the ethics of that behind that.
Yeah, I think one thing that goes through my head when comparing the two and just kind of looking at how they handled things within the civil rights movement was which approach was necessarily better, asking that question. And I think, in a way, you needed them both, right? You needed a nonviolent, peaceful protesters, but you also needed somebody who was there for just to be tough. You know, I kind of think about parenting. Like, you know, sometimes you'll with your child, you'll have to be like, you'll have to be more peaceful and approach the side of it and just be the nice cop, and then sometimes you'll have to be the bad cop. So I think in a way they were both very, very necessary into ending segregation within the civil rights movement.
Do you think Malcolm X was ethically okay though, what he was doing?
I think some of the things he did were okay. I mean, like I said, we both know that they kind of both wanted segregation gone, but then you have to think, well, how far should one go to actually, you know, stand for that injustice? But like I said, again, I think that all depends on the individual. So for Malcolm X, he thought he was doing right by it.
His intentions were good, his methods were wrong. I think like where you approached with disregarding authority and overcoming authority and the way you do it, I think that's ethically wrong. The way he did that was wrong because God commands us to obey authority. And like you said, there's a fine line of how far the government can go before you have to do something and cause action. So I think the ethics behind it, hey, I need to do something, otherwise nothing's going to happen, was correct. But the way he went about and did it was not ethically correct.
Right, transitioning from Malcolm X, I wanted to say this quote, and I think this quote from I Have a Dream speech can kind of give us the answer to how do you respectfully rebel against authority without going against the word. He says, when we allow freedom to ring, when we let it ring from every city and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, great God Almighty, we are free at last. And I think the best way, you guys can disagree with me, but the best way to rebel against authority is to stand up for freedom, is to stand up for those who are oppressed. And that's how you respectfully rebel. I say, you know what, government, there's certain people that aren't free, and I can't stand for that. Declaration of Independence says that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, are given certain unalienable rights by their Creator. That's what I stand for. And if our government, the United States of America, has that in their Declaration of Independence and goes against that, I believe that we can stand against that.
And we should stand against that. I think, yeah. It's something that is rooted in our government from way before segregation began. I mean, slavery. It was written in time of slavery, and that's something that's been in there, and still they're basically being hypocrites, big old hypocrites, standing against something. All men are created equal. I think that's something, hey, we gotta peacefully rebel because this is not right. This should not be happening. No human should be treated this way. So, I don't know, going back to what MLK was and what MLK did, he was willing to take action, take the steps necessary, and not just stand there, because you have to do something. You can't just say words. Words don't change things. Action changes things. If you want things to change, you must do something different. A definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting things to change. So there must be something different, and action must be took to do for if you want something to come across different.
Also, to add on to that, if you look at all the apostles, they stood against the Roman Empire. They did. And the result of that was, I mean, Peter was on a cross, upside over. John was exiled to an island, but they never fought back. They were never those zealots. However, they still stood up for Jesus Christ.
Mm.
That's, there is a difference there.
Yeah, I think I want to go back to what you were saying with, like, in concluding, I think in order to have that, to be able to respectfully rebel, in order to take action, it all comes down to love. Do you actually love with that person? Do you actually love the
Yeah.
oppressed? Do you actually love the people who are being shut down? Are you passionate for them? Because if you're not, you're never going to take direct action.
Mhm.
You're never going to do anything about it.
It's
And
true.
so in order to respectfully rebel, I think it all comes down to back to the individual and back to, do you actually love people? Do you actually want to see them? And then that will also come down to, God showing you love and working in your heart in order to love other people.
So, to respectfully rebel, you must love. You must love, you must take action, and that's what MLK was all about.
Yeah.
So,
All right, thank you so much for listening to History from North Central University. I am Josh,
I am Tim.
I'm Ethan.
and hopefully we get a good grade.
Good night in
Good
San
night.
Diego.
Good night.